Thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so this is the third election in a row where the majority of MLAs are new, so kind of change elections. We'd spoken to a retired N.W.T communications manager earlier who said in a different jurisdiction, in a different situation, this would kind of be like a rejection of the previous sitting governments. So moving forward in the next 4 years, what are you going to do to restore the confidence of people in the government, in your government?
Well, you know what, it's been a really tough 4 years for the territory. We've had COVID, we've had floods, and we've had fires. And so I think people are, they feeling like they need to be supported by the government through all of these types of things, right? So what we really need to do is ensure that we are more prepared going forward when we see things like that, when there's emergencies. I want the public at the end of these 4 years to know that we have a plan if there's an emergency, if there's an evacuation, and that they feel supported by their government. At the bare minimum, the government needs to provide a safe and secure environment, and that's what I want to provide.
So it's been an unprecedented 4 years, for sure, in terms of the wildfires, some of the flooding that we've had as well, specifically in your district. When we're looking forward, how are you going to choose what to prioritize, given you've mentioned in the past that the GNWT can be kind of stretched thin in a couple of areas?
Well, the priorities of this government are going to be the priorities of the Legislative Assembly. And so we're a new assembly and we haven't set the priorities yet. The 19 members come together and they set those priorities. And that'll be happening early in the new year. So that will really determine any sort of initiatives or where we focus most of our efforts. But there are still things the government should be doing anyways, despite any of those types of priorities. Like I said, we need to ensure that we have a safe and secure environment. We are prepared for emergencies. We need to shore up our basic services, things like healthcare. Until we have, regardless of what the priorities are, those are the kind of things that we will be working on.
I know that the role of the Premier in the Northwest Territories, this was talked about as well, is a little bit different from your southern counterparts. So if the Legislative Assembly is kind of setting the goals and the priorities as a whole, how will you drive them as Premier?
Well, we have a consensus style of government here, and that is, it only works when we all cooperate and we all work together. And that doesn't just mean the members of the Assembly, but also all of the governments in the territory, because we're just one of a number of governments in this territory. And there's a number of Indigenous governments, Indigenous peoples who are working towards settling land claims and self-government agreements. And so we really all need to work together, because the government of the Northwest Territories can't do it alone. We don't have the resources, we don't have the knowledge to do it alone. And so by working together as an Assembly and as governments across the territory, that's how we're going to succeed.
How do you envision working together with Indigenous governments? You mentioned this was a cornerstone of what you hoped would be your premiership. How are you going to wrap them into making some of the big decisions that the territory will be making?
Well, in the last government, we created the N.W.T Council of Leaders, and that's a table that all the Indigenous governments in the territory and the GNWT can sit at. And we meet and we discuss issues. And there's also working groups that come out of that actually have looked at policies in things like housing. And so we already have that forum to work on those issues. And there's other forums as well, the Intergovernmental Council. So I want to continue with that. And there's also been a desire from Indigenous governments to work with the GNWT and go to Ottawa together as partners to access more funds and more resources. And as a minister, I've been asked to do that a couple of times. We don't quite have the infrastructure in place to do that. You need people on the ground, you need our officials talking to officials in Ottawa. And so that when we show up with the Indigenous governments, they know what we're there for, we have a plan, they're briefed up, and then we can actually bring money back and bring resources back to the territory. So I want to advance what we've been doing by creating the infrastructure to help us work together in a more collaborative and productive way.
What do you envision that infrastructure looks like?
Well, I just know from myself as a minister, if someone just shows up and they want some funding, that doesn't generally work. You need a plan. You need the officials to know what the program is about, right? So I envision that we'll have people on the ground in Ottawa who can go and actually speak to the federal government, the federal officials, understand what programs are available, what funding is available, what funding is coming available. And then we here in the territory would be working with our Indigenous government partners to identify what are the priority areas that we want to address. And so if it's housing, how do we work together to go to Ottawa and get more housing dollars? And in the meantime, the people on the ground would be there figuring out where those dollars are and who we need to go there and talk to. And so we would show up there with a plan and I'm confident that by working that way together, we can be successful.
I want to touch upon land claims and self-government agreements as well. In your answers to the MLA questions yesterday, you'd mentioned that you think that in the next 4 years, you could get more done than in the past 25. So how do you hope to achieve that in terms of those topics?
Well, in this last government, COVID delayed a lot of things, and so we didn't really get around to looking at our negotiating mandates until a couple of years into the government. And we made some changes to those. And in the last 2 years, a lot of progress has been made at the tables because of those changes. And the things that were changed, I think they could have been changed years ago, and I think there's more that we can change. We can't be stagnant. We can't continue for another 25, 30 years negotiating. We can settle. I'm confident that we can settle. We need to move off some traditional positions. There is a desire now across the territory and a realization that we must do this. It's not benefiting anyone to have unsettled claims for generations.
This is also the first Premier, you are the first Premier that we have had in 12 years who's from outside of Yellowknife. So how will that shape the next 4 years?
It's a good question. So, being from outside of Yellowknife, being from the region, I see every day the services that we have in the region, the decisions that are made that impact the region that are made in Yellowknife. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to move to some decision making outside of Yellowknife. There's things that you need to be on the ground to know what's happening to make decisions. So I foresee that there'll be some shifts in how the government operates in that way.
And recognizing that you have now been on the job for just over an hour, what is your first goal? What's the first thing you want to achieve?
Well, like you said, it's only been an hour. We haven't even had an official cabinet meeting yet. The Assembly hasn't created any priorities. So we need to come together. As a cabinet, we need to come together. This is not a job that the Premier does alone. Even as a minister, as a regular member, I really leaned on my colleagues for their expertise, to learn about their regions, to learn about their departments. And so the first thing we need to do is really come together as a collective, figure out our vision and how we can help each other achieve that.
Thank you for your time, Premier Simpson.
Thank you for having me.